Three men drag their feet up the steep, jagged limestone of a high mountain. The air is thinning. Two ancient men are standing inside the radiance, speaking with him as if they are old friends, Moses and Elijah. Most people assume they are using combat terminology. The exodus they are planning is not a transaction. It is a demolition. Moses could pull the slaves out of the brickyards, but he could not pull the slave master out of the human heart. A physical departure across the sand could not reach the chains wrapped around the minds of the Israelites. Jesus is bringing an exodus that goes all the way down to the bone. Moses struck a rock to bring out water. Jesus will let his own flesh be struck to pour out life. Moses held up a wooden staff to divide a physical sea. Jesus will be nailed to a wooden beam to tear apart the fabric of death itself. He is marching toward Jerusalem to wade directly into the deep, suffocating black waters of the grave. He will let those waters close over his head, and then he will split them wide open from the inside out, so that a hijacked species can finally walk through on dry ground. This is the rescue operation being finalized on Mount Tabor. But before Jesus takes his first step down the mountain toward Jerusalem, the blinding light is suddenly interrupted. The conversation stops, because a terrifying, violently familiar weather system drops directly onto the limestone, a symbolic cameo. They read the story of the Transfiguration and think God simply pulled the two most famous figures from the Old Testament to give. Peter, James, and John are trembling in the dirt, entirely overwhelmed by the light. And Peter starts nervously babbling. He offers to build 3 tents, 3 tabernacles, right there on the jagged limestone. He wants to capture the moment. He wants to institutionalize the glory, to put a roof over it so they can stay on the mountain forever and avoid the bloody road to Jerusalem. But while the words are still tumbling out of his mouth, a strange shadow falls over them. Matthew describes it as a bright cloud, a luminous, heavy mist drops directly onto the peak, swallowing the disciples, swallowing Jesus, swallowing the 2 ancient prophets. This is not a meteorological event. It is the Shekinah. The Shekinah is the ancient Jewish concept for the physical, visible manifestation of the glory of God. Moses knows the damp, terrifying weight of this exact cloud. 1400 years earlier, this same dense mist settled over the peak of Mount Sinai, wrapping the mountain in thick darkness while lightning flashed inside it. Later, that same cloud descended and filled the Holy of Holies in the wilderness, tabernacle, sinking so heavy that the priests could not even stand up to perform their duties. For centuries, this cloud was the ultimate sign that the Creator had moved into the neighborhood. And now, it has descended on Mount Tabor. The disciples, a supernatural thrill. They think it is just a neat theological metaphor, the lawgiver and the prophet showing up to hand the baton, but this time, out of the blinding, heavy mist. A voice vibrates through the cold stone beneath their feet. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." The voice does not give a new commandment. It does not issue a new set of stone tablets. It issues a direct command to redirect all human attention to the rabbi from Nazareth. For a millennium and a half, the people of Israel listened to Moses for the law. They listened to Elijah for the prophets. But in this luminous cloud, the Father himself interrupts the conversation to establish a completely new hierarchy. Moses and Elijah are standing right there in the mist. But the voice from the cloud does not validate them as the final authority. It points past them. The law and the prophets were only ever the prologue. The Word made flesh is the final vocabulary of God. The disciples are so terrified by the sheer sonic force of the voice that they collapse entirely, pressing their faces completely into the dust, bracing their bodies, waiting to be consumed by the holiness of the moment. But the fire does not fall. The mountain does not break apart. Instead, a warm, calloused human hand reaches out and touches a trembling shoulder to the Messiah. A quick, glowing photo op to prove that Jesus is who he says he is, before the story turns bloody in Jerusalem. "Get up," Jesus says. "Do not be afraid." Peter, James, and John slowly lift their faces from the dirt. the blinding. Uncreated light is gone. The heavy, suffocating mist has completely evaporated. The jagged limestone is just cold rock again in the dark, and the two greatest figures in Jewish history have completely vanished without a trace. Matthew records a single, devastatingly quiet sentence to close the scene. They saw no one except Jesus himself alone. This is not just a narrative detail, it is a theological earthquake. The law had its time. The prophets had their season. The shadows served their purpose. The ancient pointers did their job. But shadows must recede when the physical substance finally arrives. The Israelites spent a millennium and a half trying to perfectly keep the law of Moses. They spent centuries waiting for the return of the spirit of Elijah. And in one terrifying flash of light, God the Father makes a definitive, universe-altering statement. Moses is not enough. Elijah is not enough. Your own attempts to perfectly obey the rules will never be enough. Moses could part a physical sea. He could not dry up the black waters of death. Elijah could call down a physical fire. He could not extinguish the burn of human rebellion. They were not the rescue operation. They were the men pointing to the rescue. And it does carry that weight. But if you look closer at the geography of this moment, at the exact history of these two specific men, their sudden disappearance from the mountain is not a demotion. It is a completion. The Old Covenant does not fail on Mount Tabor. It simply bows out. It steps back into the darkness because the true, living Word has finally spoken. The era of the prophets is entirely fulfilled in the flesh of the weary rabbi standing in the dust. He is alone on purpose. He must be alone, because the ultimate work of human redemption cannot be delegated. The ancient high priest entered the Holy of Holies completely alone. The scapegoat was driven out into the brutal, burning wilderness, completely alone. And the Son of God must walk into the crushing machinery of the Roman execution apparatus, completely alone. The mountain is quiet. The glowing cloud is gone. The ancient guard has officially stepped down, because an exodus cannot be accomplished by a committee. It requires a lamb. Jesus turns his back to the peak, his face set like flint, and begins the long, bloody walk down toward Jerusalem. But what does that solitary walk actually mean for the quiet, desperate battles you are fighting right now? A lawgiver hid in the cleft of a rock and saw only the fading afterglow of God. A prophet covered his face with a heavy cloak and heard only a whisper in the wind. At what they actually discuss, in the light, you start to see a narrative thread that has been pulling taut for over a millennium. A generation of slaves walked through a parted sea and carried their inner slavery right into the desert. A weary rabbi climbed a limestone peak in the dark, and the uncreated light of the universe bled through his skin. Two ancient men stood inside the blinding cloud and finally looked the Creator directly in the face. The Father's voice shattered the silence of the mountain and pointed past the ancient law to the living Word. The Messiah walked alone back down into the valley and began the final exodus to tear apart the fabric of death itself. One mountain, one rescue, one unbroken story. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the disappearance. The moment the blinding light fades and the thick cloud lifts, and Moses and Elijah are simply gone. Not because they failed, not because they were wrong, because they were finally finished. The lawgiver who struck the rock and the prophet who called down the fire. I stepped back into the shadows because the ultimate rescue mission did not need another teacher. It needed a lamb. If you are in a season where you feel crushed by the weight of your own failures, desperately trying to keep the rules, these two men were not chosen at random. This is not a symbolic cameo. It is a 1,400-year-old appointment finally being kept, to prove you belong. Mount Tabor is a place to stop performing. The voice from the cloud is not asking you to try harder. It is asking you to look at the sun. The exodus he accomplished in Jerusalem was not a transaction. It was a demolition of the very chains you are still trying to break on your own. And may the God who veiled his terrifying glory in human flesh walk with you into your deepest valleys and bring you out, carrying a freedom you could not have earned any other way. If this opens something up inside you, subscribe, leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from trying to earn their way to the top of the mountain. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. To feel the weight of this story, you have to realize what Moses and Elijah have in common. They didn't just write scrolls. They didn't just lead people. Both of these men stood on a high mountain and begged God to show them his glory. Both of them had to be hidden in the rocks because a human frame could not survive the full, unfiltered weight of the divine presence. The dust of the valley is still caked on their sandals, and their muscles burn from a 6-day journey of relentless walking. It is night, and both of them left the earth under strange, shrouded circumstances. Their stories ending with an ellipsis rather than a period. They have been waiting, but the detail that changes how you read this entire encounter begins before the ancient prophets even speak a word. It starts with what is actually happening to the physical body of Jesus. Matthew, chapter 17, verse 2. The gospel writer is trying to describe an event that completely shatters human categories. He writes, "And he was transfigured before them." The word our English Bibles translate as transfigured is the Greek verb metamorphou. It is a compound word. Meta implies a change of state or condition. Morphe means form, shape, or the essential inner nature of a thing. It is the exact root where we get the English word metamorphosis. But in the ancient world, it carried a very specific, devastating weight. Ancient literature was filled with pagan gods who disguised themselves. They wore human bodies like cheap cloaks. They put on temporary costumes to hide their true shapes. But metamorphou is the exact opposite of a disguise. It does not mean putting a costume on. It means exposing the reality that is already there. The light on Mount Tabor is not a reflection. It is not a spotlight beaming down from the clouds. It is not an angelic glow wrapping around his shoulders. The light is bleeding from the inside out. The mountain wind bites with cold. Peter, James, and John are heavy with sleep. Their eyes drooping, their heads nodding against their chests. Jesus is not receiving glory in this moment. He is pulling back the heavy curtain of his human flesh to let the glory out. The Apostle Paul uses this exact same Greek word in Romans 12:2. He tells the early Christians, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Transformed. Metamorphou. The inner reality of the Spirit finally breaking through the outer shell of behavior. That root changes everything about what Peter, James, and John are staring at. The Transfiguration is not an upgrade. It is an unveiling. For 30 years, the uncreated light of the universe has been walking the dusty roads of Galilee, trapped inside skin, and bone, and sweat. Now, for a fraction of a second, the containment fails. The veil drops. You can feel the raw heat of the divine nature, burning through the fibers of his clothes. He is radiating the unfiltered glory of the Creator, which explains exactly why Moses is the one standing in the light. Because this is the exact light Moses begged for, and the exact light he was denied. It is 14 centuries earlier, on the jagged, smoking peaks of Mount Sinai. Moses is standing in the thick darkness, his chest heaving, but his leadership fractured by the golden calf rebellion happening down in the valley. He is utterly exhausted, desperate for a tangible reassurance, as Jesus steps a few paces away in the dark to pray. And then, the fabric of reality tears open, that the covenant is not completely broken, and he makes a demand that borders on suicidal, "Please, show me your glory." God's response is immediate, and it is terrifying. He tells Moses that no human being can look upon the unfiltered face of the Creator and continue to breathe. So God takes this weary prophet and tucks him into a narrow crevice, a cleft in the cold stone of the mountain. God places his own hand over the opening, shielding the fragile human frame, while the catastrophic, heavy weight of the divine presence passes by. When the hand is finally removed, Moses is only permitted to see the trailing edge, the receding afterglow of God's goodness, because the full radiance would have shattered him on the spot. The cleft in the rock was not a rejection. It was a preservation. God was protecting a mortal body from a light it was simply not engineered to withstand. Moses descends Sinai with his own face glowing, so brightly the Israelites are terrified. But he never gets what he actually asked for. He never sees the face of God in the light. Until tonight, 1400 years later, Moses is standing on the limestone of Mount Tabor, and there is no rock to hide behind. There is no hand covering his eyes. He is looking directly into the blinding, uncreated light of the God of Israel. Peter blinks awake to a light so violent it forces him backward. Jesus is standing ahead of them, and his frame is not being consumed. Why? Because this time, the glory is not passing by like a storm. It has been permanently anchored inside the flesh and bone of the Messiah. Jesus is the cleft in the rock. In Christ, the fatal, burning purity of God is translated into a form that human beings can actually approach, speak with, and touch. Moses finally gets his request answered. Standing in the Galilean dust, looking into the very face he was told he could never survive seeing. But Moses is not the only man inside this glowing cloud who knows what the cold rock of Sinai feels like. He is not the only ancient prophet who had to hide his face while the presence of the Almighty tore a mountain apart. The second man standing in the light carries the exact same geographical echo. 500 years after Moses, Elijah stands on that very same mountain, Mount Horeb, Sinai. He is running for his life from a furious queen. He is exhausted. He wants to die. A wind shatters the rocks. An earthquake splits the ground. A fire burns across the ridges. God is not in the wind, or the earthquake, or the fire. Then comes a low, breathless whisper, a sheer silence. And what does Elijah do? He pulls his heavy, rough mantle over his face. He hides his eyes, but he no longer looks like the weary rabbi who broke bread on the grass. His face does not just catch the moonlight, it generates it. The cloak is not a garment of reverence. It is a shield of survival. He knows that to look directly at the source of that voice is to forfeit his life. He stands at the mouth of the cave, blinded by his own wool cloak, listening to the God he cannot look at. Until now. When you zoom out and look at the architecture of the Hebrew scriptures, a staggering pattern emerges between these two specific men. Both men fasted for 40 days in the brutal wilderness before reaching the mountain. Both men stood on Sinai and experienced a terrifying, veiled encounter with the Creator. Both men ended their earthly ministries shrouded in mystery. Moses buried secretly by the hand of God in an unmarked valley. Elijah pulled into the sky in a chariot of fire. They represent the law and the prophets, the two great pillars of the Jewish faith. For centuries, the people of Israel believed the law and the prophets were the ultimate. 89. Revelation of God to humanity. But on Mount Tabor, the law and the prophets are not teaching. They are not issuing commands. They are standing in the radiance of a rabbi from Nazareth. And they are subordinates. They represent the deep, unsatisfied longing of the Old Testament, the desperate desire to look God in the face and live. If seeing the Bible not as a collection of random, disconnected stories, but as one brilliantly woven tapestry, it shines like the sun at absolute midday. His clothing becomes violently white, a blinding, radiant purity that no earthly launderer could ever produce, is stirring something inside you. You're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So they finally get to look at him. The ancient veil is gone. The hand is removed from the cleft of the rock. The cloak is pulled back from the face. They are standing with Jesus, fully exposed to the light, speaking with him as equals in the glow. But what are they talking about? Of all the things they could discuss after centuries of waiting, what is the subject of this conversation? Luke's gospel records the exact topic, and the specific Greek word he uses to describe it completely rewrites the entire mission of Jesus. Moses and Elijah stand in the swirling, luminous mist of Mount Tabor. the limestone glowing beneath their feet, they are not talking about the beauty of heaven. They are not giving Jesus strategic advice on how to handle the Roman occupation down in the valley. Luke chapter 9, verse 31 tells us exactly what they are discussing in the light. They speak of his departure, which he is about to accomplish at Jerusalem. The word our English Bibles translate as departure or death in this verse is a very specific Greek noun. It is the word exodos. The cold darkness of the mountain is completely shattered by the sheer force of his presence. The disciples fall to the dirt, pressing their faces into. It is the exact same word used in the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament to name the second book of the Bible, formed by combining ex, meaning out of, and hodus, meaning way or road. Moses is standing on the mountain, talking to Jesus about an exodus, 14 centuries earlier. Moses led a massive population of terrified slaves out of the muddy, sun-baked brickyards of Egypt. He raised a wooden staff. The salty waters of the sea violently split apart, and a captive nation walked through the crushing depths on dry ground. That was the defining rescue operation of the ancient world, but it was incomplete. The Israelites escaped the whips of Pharaoh, but they still carried the heavy, suffocating weight of their own rebellion directly into the desert. They were freed from Egypt, but they were not freed from themselves. Now, Moses is passing the mantle to the one who will finish the job. Jesus is marching toward Jerusalem to confront a much darker, much older tyrant than Pharaoh. He is preparing to step into the deep, black waters of death itself, so that humanity can follow behind him and walk through on dry ground. His impending crucifixion is not a tragic execution. It is a targeted rescue mission. His death is not an exit strategy. It is an exodus. But the detail that makes this terrifyingly relevant is the exact nature of the slavery he is coming to break. The rocks, covering their eyes against the heat of the glare. And suddenly, they hear voices. They realize Jesus is not alone. You do not live under a Roman Caesar. You do not bake mud bricks in the Egyptian sun. But you know exactly what a tyrant feels like. You feel it in your chest when the panic wakes you up at 3 a.m. You hear it in the metallic click of a habit you swore you would break yesterday. You carry it in the exhausted slump of your shoulders when the shame whispers that you are fundamentally broken. Pharaoh is not a historical footnote. He is the anxiety demanding you prove your right to exist. He is the fear that tells you your worth is tied strictly to your production. He is the addiction that sets up camp inside your own anatomy and refuses to surrender the territory. When the biblical writers talk about human brokenness, they do not just describe it as crossing a moral boundary. They treat it as a predator, a living, breathing entity that crouches at the door. It is a hostile, occupying force that hijacks the human nervous system. Most people assume the cross is just a legal event where a spiritual debt gets paid. And it does carry that weight. But Moses and Jesus are not using banking terminology in the light.